Okay, it looks like we're streaming. It's a good sign.
Excellent. I will give the URL some love. Do you have an official chat room? Do you have an official? Is it just the chat for the video? Is it just
so
the chat?
We've been using the YouTube chat and the streaming channel in Slack.
All right. So let me get that because I have my own Slack channel. Because I have my own Slack channel where they could appropriately heckle me.
Oh, perfect.
Appropriately heckle me. I have a annoying but dedicated fan base.
So do you ever meet them in person and they start talking to you because they know you and you don't know them?
All the time. Though
it's an interesting experience.
So when I was in Atlanta, I think I met five people that I'd never met in real life before. That I'd never met that know me from podcasting and all that. And I don't know that listen to my stuff are more well grounded, but they were all totally aware of that. But they were all totally aware of that. You know, my name's Bert, you don't know me. You know, my name's Bert. That's awesome to meet you, Bert. So we talked about. But they were all pretty good about setting that. But yeah, they know about my kids and my cars. But yeah, they know about my kids and my cars and all that. It's very weird. I've never met. Yeah, it's very weird.
It's so cool though to know that people care that you're doing the stuff you're doing.
Yeah,
that was a big thing when I was at the PowerShell Summit because I hadn't gone to a summit since it was called the Experts Conference like 6 years ago or something. And I had a lot of people come up to me and say that they listen, and it was just very cool.
Yeah. I was at Summit, but all of our stuff was... over on the other side by the company store and all that. Over on the other side by the company store and all that. So there was no other... Like Jeff was there, but he was all on campus. Like Jeff was there, but he was all on campus. I never got to see him.
I'm hearing that we're echoing.
All right,
but I don't know.
Both of us or just you or me?
Seems like Todd is looping back once or twice.
So yeah, that's a problem we have. Do you want to send me
to?
Do you want to send?
I think I can fix that. Okay, can you still talk, Todd?
Yep. Can you send me a Slack invite?
It's the PowerShell Slack. Let me find it.
I don't know if I'm in the PowerShell Slack.
Wow, we need to fix that.
I feel like it's like a secret club that I haven't been invited to.
Yeah, so if you go to slack.poshcode.org.
Okay, I will do that.
I'll put a link in Skype. Okay, so did that fix the issue with Todd's audio?
Yeah, do you only have one of me now?
So I think what was happening is the NDI source was sending audio because it sends audio and video.
Okay.
And so it was getting that, and it was also getting the audio from Skype going through the processing out. So that would make sense that would go through twice, which I did not think about.
Yeah, we use XSplit, and we do that all the time. It's the same thing. Like I'll have the system audio on, which will pick up Shane's audio on Skype, and then it will have my mic, and there's just 15 different ways that you can get one person echoing. All right, so I sent the invite thing in.
Yeah, it should be automatic. I think that's automated. And there's, I think there's like a link and then there's like a text box. And I don't think the text box thing works. I think you have to click the link that says PowerShell Slack, log in via the PowerShell Slack.
Oh, so I did just put my email in. Okay. Good to know. Okay, so... So you can sign up.
Oh, there's a link that says sign up directly on Slack.
All right.
Yeah, I think Joel said that this is the text box is broken.
So how do you set up this invite thing like this?
I have no idea. Oh, so there may be a better link here. Send it to you.
Well, I just filled out the thing in the invite link.
Yeah, that looks like a better link than one I just sent you.
Now you tell me.
I'm learning too, man. I've been on PowerShell Slack for years.
All right. I was just thinking today, I need to be in more Slack channels. That's not that password. That is that password.
And there's also a Discord, PowerShell Discord community, and Discord and Slack, bot back and forth. I think Joel sent all that stuff up.
Interesting. All right, so I will do that. Got it. All right, so which channel are
streaming? There's a streaming channel.
All right. Man, at any time I hear people talk about how great Teams is, I'm like, have you used Slack? like you sound like you haven't used Slack.
I haven't really used Teams. I've used it just recently for kind of online impromptu meetings, because the meetings in Slack used to be good, but now the audio is garbage.
Really?
And especially if somebody's remote on VPN, it just, you can't understand them at all. So the audio has gotten bad. So, the screen sharing works great, but the audio is garbage. And Teams seems to work much better for that.
Teams does work okay for that. The big thing that kills me for Teams, that is absolutely just makes me shout profanities and curse to the sky every single day, is that it can't switch contexts easily. So, like, I've got a team at work, and if I've got a customer team, to switch between those two takes double-digit seconds every single time.
Oh gosh,
it is. It's untenable. It's untenable. It's pretty bad. So then you end up doing this weird thing where you have some of your teams in a browser, but then that doesn't work if you want to share video. I mean, it's a horrible experience.
Ugh.
All right, so I am in. And no, Joel, I have not used Discord either.
I'm not a big fan of the Discord UI. I don't know if there's like multiple clients, but I've used it a couple times and just didn't like the UI. Hopefully somebody's written a better one.
Yeah, I'm being forced to use Teams because I'm sucking from the Microsoft teat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and I think that, we're looking at it internally because we get it as part of our EA, and, why are we spending, $500,000 or whatever it is on Slack?
Yeah. Yeah, and I get companies that, so I use that argument if somebody's got Box or Dropbox or something, and I drop in singing the praises of Office 365. I'm like, you got this OneDrive thing, I can save you a bunch of money. So, I mean, I totally get that aspect. But man, Teams is just not a Slack killer as far as I'm concerned. Teams has better GIFs. Are you kidding? Merrill is one of the people. I don't know who you have that like monitors the chat rooms and kicks out people that cause problems, but I want to point Merrill Sanders out to that person and just have your finger on the button for Merrill. He's a troublemaker.
I have literally never kicked anyone out of anything.
Tonight will be a big night.
It'll be the first time.
Yep, get to kick somebody out the first time.
It'll be a neat experience.
Yep.
Okay, so we should probably officially start.
Okay, do you need to shut the door, or do you mind hearing my half audio?
Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
My wife's going to be in the next room, and so I wasn't sure if she wanted to hear the blatant nerdery that's about ready to begin.
Oh, yes. We're going to lay down some serious nerdery over here.
Full frontal nerdity for the next hour.
Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, I'm going to say that again because apparently I can't say the name of my own show. Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to have with us Todd Klindt. Welcome, Todd.
Not as pleased as I am to be here. Thanks for having me. I was very excited when I got the email. I put out, you guys had sent something out, and I threw my name in the hat. And you guys got back to me. I was very excited.
So you have actually been on the show before, but it's been a long time. So we looked it up. You were on episode 209, which was released on January 1st, 2013, where you were talking about SharePoint 2013.
An oldie but a goodie, yeah.
Oh boy, have things changed since then.
SharePoint has become a much different animal than I wish I'd looked that up and went back to see what I was saying about PowerShell and SharePoint and all that 6 years ago. Because it's been a big 6 years.
So, can you give us a little bit of your background? I know that you were in the Army, weren't you? Is that right?
Yeah. I spent 9 years in the reserves in the National Guard here in Iowa, in the Army Guard and Reserve. And that was actually where I got my first paying computer nerd job. So like I was always growing up, I was the kid that got his got wedgies and got stuffed in his locker and all that. The being a nerd thing was not nearly as cool when you went to high school in the 80s and 90s as it is now.
No, not at all.
So it was dark times for our people back then, Jonathan. But no, I was in the Army doing other things, and I had to prepare a presentation about something that was not computer related and all, and because I was just a nerd and over nerded everything, I had written a Visual Basic app to show some stuff, and I needed a computer to do stuff, and I just happened to walk into the place at the National Guard headquarters there in Iowa and had to unzip some things and move some stuff around. And one of the guys is like, "Who are you? And would you like a job?" And that was my first full-time computer gig, was for the Iowa National Guard.
Nice.
And it's funny. So I got out, I ETS'd 19 years ago.
What does ETS mean?
It's when you get out, it's termination of service or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I got out in 2000. It's been a long time, but so I got to do cool things. I got to work on helicopters and computers, and it was a good time. Highly recommend it. And that was funny. So it was a lot different. Being in the National Guard or the Army was a lot different then than it is now. When I was in the Army in the 90s, you might see combat. Like it's mostly college money, but if things really go haywire, you might see combat. Now it's not if you get deployed, it's how many times and where.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's a much
How many times
thing.
have you been to Afghanistan?
Exactly. And so that was one of those funny things. As you look back, the older you get, you look back at turning points in your life. And I got out of the Army in October of 2000. And my nerd career was starting to take off, so I was doing some more traveling and I was writing books. And that one weekend a month just always came at the wrong time. So my second enlistment had ended, and I was getting out. But you could sign some paperwork where you would stay on the books and stay in the Army, but you didn't get paid, you didn't go to drill, and then you would stay on the books for a year. So if you decided you want to come back, you could reactivate yourself. And I was going to do that. I had the paperwork, had planned on signing it, but when I was leaving, I got busy turning all my things in and saying goodbye to my buddies and all that. And I just forgot to sign it, forgot to turn it in. That was October of 2000. And it would have kept me in the Army's gentle grasp until October of 2001.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my guard unit was absolutely activated the morning of September 11th, 2001, and they went over to Afghanistan very soon after that. Spent 14 months over there. We're back in the States 93 days before they got their orders to go to Iraq.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So my life would have taken a very, very different turn had I signed that paper and turned it in that day. That was, and I tell you, I absolutely, not so much now because it's 20 years later, but I absolutely regretted that. I had some real, like those were my guys.
Oh, yeah.
We trained them for this. This was the thing, and they were all going, and I was not. It was tough.
Yeah, I could see that being really frustrating.
It was, but it was another interesting thing. So I enlisted in the Army in November or October of 91. So the first Gulf War had just been over for a few months, and I was a young, bright-eyed, naive 17-year-old and believed everything I saw on the news. And when I started going to drill, my unit had been over there. So people, men that I was hanging out with had been over in the desert fighting the war that I'd been watching on TV. And they were telling me stories of things that happened that completely contradicted what I was seeing in CNN, reading in the newspapers. Okay. And I'm like, man, that's not at all what, and they're like, no, really, we were there. We still have the sandy boots to prove it. And that was the first time that I really got this, was made aware that what you see in the news is not always exactly what's going on. As one of the guys put it, Saddam Hussein's got CNN also. So we got to be careful what we tell those people because it gets out. So when my unit went back in 2001, it was the same kind of deal because I was sending those guys, snacks and calling them and all that. And I was hearing stories, and it was interesting, but I miss it. It was a good time.
So what are you doing these days?
So I have fully embraced my nerdery, for the last 15, 20 years. I work for a small consulting company, for a couple of buddies of mine. It's called Sympraxis Consulting, and we do Office 365. We're all SharePoint. Well, three of the four of us are SharePoint MVPs. And then the fourth guy, Derek, is not. But this was a fun one. So I'm not a developer, despite the fact that I'm on a PowerShell podcast, and kind of people would probably argue otherwise. But two of my friends, Mark Anderson and Julie Turner, worked at this company, and they kept getting contracts where their development skills would be needed, but then they would have this admin part that they couldn't quite. So I was doing some contracting for them, and then we decided to make it official 6-8 months ago. So doing that. And it's funny because I'm an admin, but I legitimately spend 80% of my billable time doing PowerShell. And I really hate the overused term of DevOps because number one, I have no idea what it actually means, but that is very much what I feel like I'm doing. I'm adminning things, but I'm PowerShelling the crud out of it. So it's been great. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. In general, the more PowerShell I'm writing, the happier I am in my job.
It is. I would never admit this in public, and if you repeat it, I'll deny it. But I certainly can appreciate now why developers love doing what they do. Just today, I'm writing some PowerShell to take an archive from one really bad web platform and turning it into an archive that we can import into SharePoint. And this archive is just, I think whoever programmed this was drunk.
Oh, gosh.
Or a monkey, or both. I can't rule any of that out. So really weird things. And every time I knock one of those little problems out, I'm like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. I like this. One of my favorites is for every document that this system puts into its archive, it has 97 fields of information.
Oh my gosh.
97. And as if 90 some wasn't enough, for every one of these archives, 3 of them are repeated. So of those 97 fields, there are 94 fields, and then 3 of the fields twice.
Oh my gosh.
This is the kind of stuff. So I'm walking through these files, and but it just every time I get one of these, it's so much fun. I'm loving it. So I got the import working today, and I'll show that to the customer tomorrow, and we'll tweak it. And I have to give a shout out. So Jeff Hicks has been, I've known Jeff Hicks for 100 years, I think. And he I don't know the state of Jeff Hicks's liver, but if Jeff's liver is not in good shape, I am partly or wholly responsible for that. He has been the guy that has, pushed me past some of these problems that I've had trying to figure things out in PowerShell. And I think I've driven the man to drink. I think, so I have to give him the shout out. But he's been really helpful. And it's one of those things where like he will help me with any problem. And I've been taking PowerShell problems to him for forever. But I know that the pound of flesh is him mocking me for whatever that I'm doing. So I come, I'm like, I'm ashamed to show you this PowerShell, Jeff. And I know I'm doing something wrong. And he's like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? But it's been a lot of fun. And it's all, Office 365. It's all SharePoint. And it's great. Yeah.
So I imagine that coming from because you've been doing SharePoint for a long time.
For as long as there was an on-prem, I've used every version of SharePoint in production since SharePoint 2001. Yeah.
So with having usually a long span of time between versions of SharePoint that are coming out to the way things work now, where you may get a new feature today that wasn't there yesterday, and you may get another new feature next week that wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. How hard is it to stay on top of all of those changes to keep your level of knowledge up to par where it needs to be for what you're doing?
Impossible.
Okay.
And that is something, and I don't know about you. So I've been an MVP since 2006, 2007, I forget. When I first got into the MVP program, I thought it would be an ego boost for me, like a reaffirming. But what it has done is it has humbled me because I am constantly in a room where everybody is smarter than me. Like I'm the dumbest person in every room I step into at any MVP thing ever. It's been that way for over a decade now. And that has helped me come to terms with the fact of things like this. Like I don't expect myself to be able to keep up with everything that Microsoft drops into Office 365.
Okay.
And I think most customers, most consultants, but also most customers have figured that out as well. And I think what that has done for me is I don't go into any situation sure of myself and knowing that I know all the answers. I had an issue or a situation with a customer here a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, this doesn't exist. You can't do this. He's like, I'm pretty sure that you can. I'm like, well, show me, because it may have changed, and it's something that had been added, and it wasn't in my tenant yet, and it was in theirs, and so I just never want to be that person. It's like, I'm right, you're wrong, and being an MVP and being surrounded by people that are just head and shoulders smarter than me. And this constantly moving technology is really, I try to keep myself humble because you can't keep up. But I work with people, like I said, Mark and Julie, who are developers, and we each see different pieces of the technology, and we work with different parts of it with customers, and we're always feeding off of each other. So one of the things, Mark is a developer. He's been a developer for a long time, JavaScript and like that. I've got him excited about PowerShell now, and he had to do some functionality for a customer, had to create some artifacts and that in SharePoint, something that he would have normally done in JavaScript, but he was thinking about doing PowerShell, and SharePoint Online has this idea of site scripts and site designs, which are reusable chunks of code that you can have when you provision something in SharePoint that will do branding or create lists or libraries, all manner of things. And he's like, Todd's been talking about how great all this is. I'm going to give it a shot. And so now he's doing that. And so we just kind of learn off of each other and pick things up. And he's doing things with it that I haven't done. So I'm learning from it. And that's really the way. You just have to have these people that touch other parts of the software and just bounce things off each other.
Yeah, I've been kind of amazed at how good some of that site design stuff in SharePoint is now compared to how horrible it used to be. I had not too long ago, I had an opportunity to build a training site based on some training that I'd given in person and I recorded. And I wanted to, create a training site with labs and videos and stuff. And I created it in the on-prem instance of SharePoint, and it was a royal pain. And there were things I was trying to do that I could just never get to work right. And finally, one of the guys who was there was like, well, we're about to start migrating this stuff over to Azure. What would you say? Azure, SharePoint Inline? What's
Office 365.
Office 365, SharePoint Inline. And he's like, let me set you up and, you can try this. And oh my gosh, it was night and day. And it looks so much better with the new templates. And, it was very simple to make it look amazing. Yep. And I was just very, very happy with that.
Yeah. And I don't know what your background is, but I can't design anything. Like I can't design where things should be on a page. I use too many fonts. I can't match colors. If every shirt I owned didn't go with blue jeans, I probably couldn't dress myself. I mean, I just have no mind for that at all. And one of the things that's great about SharePoint is I don't have to. Right. It just all looks good. And not only does it look good, but I can put it out there and it looks good on a tablet. It looks good on a phone. Everything rearranges and reshapes. So that was one of the things I often tell my SharePoint testimonial. The way that I got into SharePoint a long time ago, I was an admin, a Windows admin, Exchange admin, and all that. And the company that I worked for had been purchased by a larger company that had offices all over the world. And my boss said, well, we need to get a hold of all the servers that we have and what their warranty expirations are and serial numbers and all that. He's like, so I want you to do that. And you need to put it up on a web page that everybody can see and we can keep track of it. And I remember thinking, I can't make web pages. Like I'm done. I'm going to have to start learning how to sack groceries or fry fries or something. And I had been at one of the tech eds and I had the Office XP CD there and I'd seen the demo of this SharePoint thing. And I installed it and set up a SharePoint 2001 site and was able to take all the server information that I had and put it out there and everybody on my team could see it and they could edit it. And I looked like a rock star. But I didn't have to build any of that. And that was the moment when I got SharePoint and became the SharePoint expert at my company. And it's been my career ever since.
Nice.
So yeah, and it's great for people like you. You don't have to learn how to design and you just do the thing that you wanted to do and be done with it.
Yeah, and it looks much better than it did in my head. I'm like, wow. You throw that part on there and it's like, that looks really good.
and that's a funny one for us SharePoint people, because whenever I would install SharePoint on-prem, and I'm talking from 2007 to 2010, every one of them, there would be two things that would happen right away. The first time I would show it to somebody, they would always ask, why is it so slow? And then how can we make it not look like SharePoint? That yes. was always it. Nobody wanted it to look like SharePoint. That was always, I don't get those questions anymore. Now, part of the reason is because you can't make it not look like SharePoint anymore. They've mostly taken all that functionality out, but it looks so good and functions so well out of the box. It's just not a thing that people get wrapped up into thinking about. So it's pretty nice.
And doesn't some of that stuff cause headaches too if you try and migrate? Like some of the customization stuff when you're ready to go to SharePoint Online can that's give you fits.
There's very little visual customization that will go into SharePoint Online. They've got that locked down tight. For the on-prem versions, you can still customize it a lot, but it never seems to go from version to version. Like no amount of customization you do in SharePoint 2007 would migrate to 2010. The content would all go over, but none of the custom. So then you'd have to rewrite it. And then 2.5, 3 years later, when you wanted to go to SharePoint 2013, none of that customization would move over. I remember, so what years? It was 10 years ago, doing branding projects on SharePoint 2007 that were in 5 figures, 6 figures, and those days are gone. Like nobody does that anymore. You don't have to.
Wow,
it's fun to use.
So what's the state of the union for PowerShell with the Office 365 stuff? I know a little bit about it. I mean, it was, you're basically doing implicit remoting all the time to do anything with, at least on the Exchange side. But I don't know anything really about interacting with SharePoint via PowerShell, except when I had to pull some data from, it was like a SharePoint list, and doing it on-prem, I had to use some weird some weird format to pull that data out. And then when I did, it was just a mess, and half of it was links to other stuff. And it's like, well, how do I trace where, what this person's name is? It shows up fine in the list, but here it's like, a GUID that, I need to find where it's associated with. And it took me a while to get all that stuff sorted out.
Yeah. It's, so I tell people, I've always told people, and I steal this line from Mark Manasseh. If raise your hand if you want to learn PowerShell. The good news for the rest of you is you don't have to worry about being in the technology field anymore. You can go about and find your next job. You have, and it has never been more the case that you need PowerShell to be an Office 365 admin or a SharePoint admin these days. And and we'll get to the differences between the products here in a minute, because that is a hilarious story. One of the things, so we talked earlier about how rapidly the product is changing. And one of the things that we figured out is when new functionality shows up in SharePoint or Office 365, it always shows up first in PowerShell. If there's something that you need to turn on, a switch you need to flip, or a dial you need to turn, it always shows up in PowerShell first. Site design, site scripts showed up in PowerShell first. And the reason for that is because putting knobs and levers on web pages is complicated. You got to figure out where it's going to go, and where it's going to go when it's tablet sized, and where it's going to go when it's mobile sized, and all of that. And once you get that figured out, then you need to figure out how to translate it into the 20-some languages that Office 365 is in. Putting a setting on a page is a lot of work. Putting it in PowerShell, it's maybe a parameter, it's maybe a new commandlet if things are really crazy. Everything new shows up in PowerShell first. So you have to know PowerShell. And there's a lot that you can only do in PowerShell. So I get, and this is another funny thing. 10 years ago, I was doing classes on PowerShell with SharePoint Server, and 75-minute sessions at Tech Ed and all that. And I had a conference back in 2014, I think, that said, hey, you did that PowerShell with SharePoint session last year. Everybody loved it. They raved about it. We're getting some questions about Office 365. Can you do that same session with SharePoint Online? I'm like, absolutely. I love PowerShell. I can do it. When I did that session, the SharePoint module the PowerShell module for SharePoint Online had 37 commandlets, I think. Whereas at the time, SharePoint Server had 650.
Oh gosh,
it was horrible. So I remember when I started that session, I'm like, here's the module, here is the 37 commandlets. We're going to speak about each of them for 2 minutes. Because we didn't do that, but that's what the state was back then. And it has gotten so much better these days. I don't remember what the commandlet count now is for that particular module, 150, 160, something like that. But there is a bunch of great modules out there. So you talked about the different products. And this is the same story in the cloud as it is on-prem. Every product group writes their own module. So the Exchange team writes the Exchange one, which you talked about is remoting. The SharePoint team writes their own. The Teams team, I don't know what they do. I think they go find some drunken college interns and have them write it. I can't prove that. The Power Apps team, 7th graders, I think. I can't prove that either. So it's like PowerShell has always been. You learn the basics of PowerShell. You learn verb-noun. You learn get member, get command. All that's the same, but then every module is different. Every product is different. So Exchange uses the remoting, whereas none of the other ones do. Teams uses Teams, except it doesn't. It uses Skype for Business, except the commandlets in the Skype for Business module don't always call it Skype for Business. Sometimes it calls it Link. It's just this hodgepodge. And the last time I checked, and it's been a while, Teams has its own module written by the Teams team, but there are a whole bunch of Teams settings that you can't set with the Teams module because Teams, as we know on the back end, has a lot of Skype for Business in it. The last time I checked, the Skype for Business module had 50 commandlets that had the word Teams in it.
Wow.
Outside of the Teams module.
Okay.
So it's a mess. Now, one of the things that I've done is I start blatantly plugging my blog and other such pieces of real estate is I wrote a blog post on all of the modules that I use as a SharePoint admin or an Office 365 admin, how to install them and what version they're at, this morning. so that when people ask the question, what PowerShell should I use when I, try to get my hands wrapped around Office 365, I just pointed at that blog post and I'm like, here are the different products you have to touch. Here are the modules that I use. Here's the link to the PowerShell gallery. Here's the command to install it. This is the tools that I use. And that has been a very popular blog post. And but I mostly did that for me. Like most blog posts that most people do, it's really just a note to myself. Dear Todd, here's all the PowerShell modules you need to install every time you set up a new machine.
You're going to need this information at some point.
Yep. And so that's been pretty popular. But there are so many, and so it's a bunch of official Microsoft ones, and then there's 3 or 4 third-party ones. Specifically, if anybody's listening to this and they don't already know about it, you have to get the PnPPowerShell, the Patterns and Practices PowerShell. Have you stumbled across that yet?
No. What is it?
It is the most amazing thing ever. I would give up sliced bread, and I would give up anything instead of the PnPPowerShell. So several years ago, Microsoft officially but unofficially set up this group called Patterns and Practices. It was essentially Microsoft giving guidance to developers. Here are the patterns and practices you should use when developing against SharePoint. And it's web parts and it's branding and it's all of that. One of the things that they did was they had a patterns and practices for PowerShell. Here's how you should write PowerShell commandlets that interface with SharePoint. And part of that was they said, well, we should write some example PowerShell commandlets. And they ended up being really, really useful. And so now the PnPPowerShell comes out every month. It's a group of commandlets. It's a couple hundred commandlets, and it is everything. I couldn't do a thing in Office 365 or SharePoint Online without the PnPPowerShell.
Now, is that at GitHub, SharePoint, PnP-PowerShell? Is that the one?
Probably so. I should send you to my blog. So if you go if you go to toddklindt.com, and then on the bar across the top, there's an Office 365 PowerShell module installs. It's listed on there.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That thing. So it is as official of a Microsoft project as it can be without having a SKU. So the code is signed with Microsoft's cert.
Okay.
They won't give me that cert. I can't sign my modules with that cert. That's a thing. One of the senior project managers for SharePoint at Microsoft, Vesa Juvonen, is the godfather of the PnP. He blesses everything that's in there, and it is it is great. So that is the one thing. So the thing that you were trying to do, where you're trying to pull list items out with the SharePoint server PowerShell, the smallest object you can get to is a web. And so then you had to grab the web, and then you had to get the lists property of that web, yes. And then you had to get the items property. I mean, it was so you went into a dark. You understand PowerShell, so once you started doing your get members, you figured it out and you cursed, but you got it. The PnPPowerShell, they take it down to the item. So there's a PnPPowerShell commandlet to upload a file, download a file, grab a list item. It's all built in there. It is great. Joel in the chat room is asking, why don't more Microsoft Teams use the PnP? I don't know. It is mostly SharePoint, but you can get into an awful lot of Office 365 with those commandlets. So you can, when I write modules for customers, when I write PowerShell for customers, I try to confine it to as few modules as I can, just to make it easy for them to make sure things are installed. And most of the time, I can get everything done with the PnP. I don't have to pull in the SPO modules or the Teams modules. But yeah, the PnP stuff is just amazing. One of the greatest community projects ever. I just can't say enough good things about it.
So are most of the modules that you recommend available in the gallery, or is it a hodgepodge of, MSI installers and weirdness?
These days so obviously Exchange isn't. I think everything else is. The Power Apps and Teams one. I love those guys. I know a couple of those guys really well. I love them, respecting. The products are great. Their PowerShell, like I couldn't take a blow to the head hard enough to write PowerShell that bad. I could fall down a flight of stairs and write better PowerShell than that module.
Wow.
And it was, so one of the, I don't know if you've messed much with Flow or Power Apps. But it
just some simple things.
Yeah. That group is very much focused on functionality, which is why it works so great and it's easy to use. But they don't have anybody that's an admin like me. So there's a whole lot of holes in the admin story. Like as a tenant admin, how can I see where all the flows are at? Where can I see where all the Power Apps are at? If somebody's going to leave the company, how can I see what flows they own so that I can assign them to somebody else so they still work? All of that is missing. So when I saw the blog post that Power Apps team had released the modules, I'm like, yes, and I'm running around the room and I'm cheering. And then I go to the page, and it's not this way now. They've improved it. But honest to God, if I was to try to design the worst installation experience ever that actually worked in the end, it wouldn't have been as bad as what they did. So it was legitimately a zip file that you downloaded and unzipped. And you had to register DLLs. I don't remember if you had to make a registry entry as part of that or not, but it was just horrible. And then they released 2 different modules. So one was like for end users, and then one was for admins, but they don't use prefixes, and they have the same commandlet names that do different things in both modules. So you have to install the modules in a specific order and allow one to clobber the other, or you don't get all the right commandlets. It is.
Oh my gosh.
It is atrocious. So they fixed that now. It's in the gallery. It's still 2 different modules. There's still the clobbering. That has gotten a little better. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's all in the gallery now.
Okay.
Now, but that has led to another story. They haven't always been there. Like the SPO modules were not always in the gallery. And so I had them installed as MSIs, but you can't update an MSI with the gallery version. So I'd have to uninstall. And the SPO one, I had a lot of trouble exercising it from my systems. I was deleting files out of directories and all that. And just this morning had to help somebody try to get that upgraded so they could get into the gallery and get into that cadence of updating it from the gallery.
So how often do those modules get updated?
The PnP Get One gets it every month, pretty much like clockwork. And the other ones are close to that cadence, monthly-ish. So as I look at my incredible PowerShell page here on this. So I guess I don't have dates on here, but it's monthly-ish, something like that.
So that's pretty good. It's continually improving, and it sounds like.
Yeah, and in the chat room. So I wanted to mention a couple of things. They're talking about the graph in the chat room. There are no official PowerShell commandlets for the graph, but I know the PnP PowerShell can attach to the graph and can do graphy things. So groups, Office 365 groups are one of those areas where, as a SharePoint person, you need to be able to make groups and create groups and add and delete that. But that's a little higher level. That's in Azure. So you have to you can use the PnP modules, but connect to the graph and get a graph token and do all those all that dance, and then you can play with that. So the graph is sneaking in to PowerShell.
And so the graph is kind of like an API layer between you and the Azure landscape, or what's I've never really understood what the graph is.
I sort of understand it. So it's that whole thing, you really don't understand anything until you can explain it to a 5-year-old.
Sure.
I can probably explain it to my 11-year-old. My 9-year-old's pretty smart. I could probably get her most of the way. My 5-year-old, he's a boy, so he'd be, eating rocks or, jumping off of something. I don't know.
Finding something to swing.
Set something on fire. So you had it easy. You had your boy first, so you understood the chaos. I had 2 girls and then a boy. I was not mentally or physically prepared for that at all. But the graph, so it's an API, but I think of it as like, so Joel in the chat room is saying it's like Tron's The Grid, very much like that. It's like the back end of everything. And it came out of the search division at Microsoft. So it's kind of search, but it's search that has its fingers everywhere. So it is the clearinghouse for Exchange and SharePoint and Azure and Teams. Everything works into the graph.
And that's all accessible via REST?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so
I believe so. Yeah.
So if you don't have commandlets, you could use invoke REST method, figure out what the endpoint was, and pass it whatever JSON it's expecting, and that kind of stuff.
Yep. More importantly, you can go to the Graph Explorer. So they have a UI that will do it. That will build you out of that, which is just amazing for trying to figure out all the crazy commands they have. But yeah, there's the Graph Explorer, and I think it's like, explorer.graph.com or something. If you Google Graph Explorer, it shows up. But you can absolutely tell it, I want to do a query against Exchange, and then it will list you all of the API calls that it knows about, and it will build the JSON for you. It will show you the JSON, show you the responses. It's a pretty good tool for that.
Nice.
And the graph, much like you, I didn't have a good clue with the graph. It always seemed to be the answer to things that I didn't understand. But then I finally had a use for it and started playing with it, and I wish I understood it better. I'm intrigued by the graph. And the other thing about the graph that really makes me love it is at Build last week they released some new stickers, like the new graph logo, and the graph logo is a giraffe, a giraffe.
Oh, nice.
And its spots are like all the little endpoint. So Jeremy Thake is a buddy of mine. He's on the team, and I'm like, well done, Jeremy. Well done. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of graph PowerShell people writing, here and there.
Yeah, and I'm sure too that it having the ability to interact with it via REST, you could wrap all that stuff in PowerShell functions. I'm sure pretty easily.
Yeah, the tricky bit with the graph is permissions.
Oh, okay.
Because it requires a lot of. And they're erring on the side of caution. It requires some pretty elevated permissions in places where it doesn't seem like it ought to.
Okay.
So, for instance, one of them, and they may have fixed this, but one of the ones was if I'm a member of a group, an Office 365 group, I can go into SharePoint and I can click and I can see everybody in the group, and I can add people to the group. I can do whatever. But with my non-admin user, if I use the graph, I can't query the members of a group. I don't have permission. If I go to SharePoint and do it, I can. Or if I go to Exchange or Outlook, I can do it. But it's the way that they've built it in the background. So they need to figure that out a little bit. But the permissions are so tight and so confusing and so granular. It's got a pretty steep learning curve.
Yeah, I imagine though they need to have as much power around that as they can, and as much provided their customers whatever sort of granularity that they need to assign the appropriate permissions for their people.
Yeah, and Core Bob in the chat room also mentioned that they changed the APIs. They did this weird thing where the graph has two sets of APIs, numbered 1 and 2. And the average person would think that 2 would be better than 1, and 2 would do all the things that 1 does and then extra, but that is not the case. There are things that 1 does that 2 doesn't do. And 1 has been updated since 2 came out, and that just gets really confusing. The Graph Explorer has both of those in there, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're like, what? Yeah.
So where are you seeing these chat questions? Because I am not seeing them.
I'm in the Bridge channel in Slack.
Oh, in the Bridge. Ah, okay. I was in the streaming channel. Yep. I have a sticker. Long live the Bridge.
Yeah. I assume that's all of our viewers using Discord.
That makes sense.
Yep. Oh, and somebody said that somebody's making Microsoft Graph modules, so that's good. I look forward to seeing those. I had to write my own. So I don't know if you've done much with groups in Office 365. They are an odd little security construct, but you can't nest them in any way. So you can't put an Office 365 group inside of another one. You can't put an Azure AD group inside of an Office 365 group. It's really, really ugly. So I had a customer that said, hey, I've got 2 groups that I want to have exactly the same, membership, but I can't nest anything anywhere. So how can I do this?
Okay.
And so my first question was, doctor, it hurts when I do this, don't do that. I'm like, if this is exactly the same people, why is it 2 groups? Why isn't it just 1? Never really did get a solid answer for that, but I ended up having to write some PowerShell that accessed the graph that did the group, pulled the group membership, pulled the other group membership, mixed them together, copied them back out. And I had to write all that from scratch because there were no real, copy group permission things. Someday, maybe. I have blogged that at toddklindt.com as well.
So in addition to yourself, what are some other good resources for people who maybe have just found themselves into a position where they need to start learning SharePoint and how to deal with SharePoint Online and where to pick up the skill set to be able to use PowerShell to do what they need to do?
That is a tough one. I'm on Twitter a lot, and there's a pretty active SP help hashtag on there. Tech community has a lot. I see a lot of things there. Stack Overflow has a lot of threads. I find a lot of, I'm not active there, but I find a lot of answers there when I'm looking for solutions. So that's probably good. Tech community is probably a good place to start. And then Twitter. And if anybody's on Twitter, I'm at Todd Klindt on Twitter. And if you have, if you're looking for that, if you're somebody, let me know. The problem is I know enough people in the community now, like I was talking about Jeff earlier. If I've got a question about something, if it's a PowerShell question, I can ask Jeff. If it's a graph question, I can ask Jeremy. I don't take part in some of those communities like I probably should.
Yeah, it looks like there's a SharePoint channel in the PowerShell Slack.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned that I should do that.
Maybe worth checking out.
Yeah, I like helping out. I like doing that.
So I found out today, which I didn't know before, that you also do a podcast.
I do, yeah.
So tell me about that.
I have been doing my podcast for just over 10 years. My first episode was March of 2009.
You've got way more episodes than we do.
Yeah, 430, something like that. That was a thing that started out, I've been listening to podcasts forever. And it was, I listened to, so back when I had the brilliant idea to do my own podcast, I was listening to obviously Leo Laporte's stuff, Adam Carolla, Dig. That tells you how long ago this was. And I remember thinking, this is a good way to get information out without having to type up blog posts. And because I'm such a perfectionist when it comes to blog posts. I just don't want to put anything in print that is even remotely not correct in every situation that could be thought of. And so I just started recording that back in March of 2009. I've been fortunate that I've had employers who have tolerated that for the last 10 years. Now I've got a buddy of mine, Shane Young, who was a friend of mine back then, but him and I do it together. He was a SharePoint MVP, does a ton of PowerShell. For the longest time, if you went to YouTube and searched for the word PowerShell, his idiot face popped up, which is just a travesty of justice in every conceivable way. He does more Power Apps and Flow and that kind of now, but him and I, once a week, every Wednesday morning at 10 Central, we get together and talk about what's going on in Office 365 and what tech we've been playing with lately. We both have Teslas, so we annoy the crap out of people talking about that.
Do you stream it?
Yeah, so we stream it live on YouTube, kind of like you're doing, and then the videos are on YouTube as well. So there's links to that on my blog. I think the YouTube channel is Todd Klindt Netcast. So if you go look for that.
Yeah, all these links will be in the show notes for you.
Yeah. I'll send them all to Jonathan before we sign off. But yeah, it's been fun, and I mentioned before the show that I was in Atlanta this weekend speaking at a SharePoint Saturday event, and probably had 5 people come up to me that had been listening to the podcast and reading my blog and knew me from online and just come up and introduce themselves, and man, that makes it all worth it. Like, writing blog posts is tough, and slogging out the podcast every week is a lot of work.
Sure. Yeah.
But having somebody come up and say, man, I had this one question and you and Shane were talking about it, and it turned that light on for me, man, that's the best thing ever. So it's kept me going.
That's fantastic. And I don't know if it's the case for you, but like when I first started doing this podcast, I did it to force myself to learn PowerShell. Have you found that the fact that you are talking about SharePoint on a weekly basis kind of encourages you or forces you to continue to learn?
Absolutely. So I've got a OneNote that I've kept every podcast note in for 10 years. And when we finish a podcast on Wednesday morning, then I open up the next tab for the next week. And then as the week goes, I am just constantly looking for topics for next week's podcast. Okay. So potentially tech articles, SharePoint articles, whatever that I would have not necessarily paid attention to because they're not necessarily right where I'm at, I throw them in there. And yeah, so number one, it makes me pay attention to topics that I wouldn't necessarily have otherwise paid attention to. But then I've got a great resource if I ever need to search for things because I've got all these. So It's almost too big now. I had to make an archive OneNote so that I could not have so many hits for common terms. But yeah, definitely we're always, trying to make sure we're staying on top of, got to have something to talk about. And yeah.
So I imagine that's gotten easier with now that things are changing so much more quickly now that we've got SharePoint Online, and that's good. I'm sure that a podcast is a great way for somebody to keep on top of that technology because it is moving so fast.
Yeah, it's been one of those things, and again, Shane and I, we used to work in exactly the same space. That's how we ended up meeting, but our paths have diverged a little bit. So it's interesting seeing what's in his field that he brings into the notes and the things that I talk about. It's absolutely and it's like if you've ever written any books, you always learn something when you're writing books. Every time I do a talk, I learn something when I'm getting ready to do the talk, and it's that every week churning those out.
Nice.
Yeah. And so in the chat room, Merrill Sanders, he's been in our podcast multiple times. I've known Merrill forever, back when he was just a budding. Merrill has been doing a PowerShell chat or PowerShell talk at conferences. I've seen that a couple times, so glad to see him in here.
Excellent.
Yep. He's a believer.
So where are you speaking recently, or have you got stuff coming up?
Oh, yeah. So next week is the big SharePoint conference in Vegas. So I don't know when this will get published, but the week of May 21st is a SharePoint conference in Vegas. So I'm doing a day-long session on SharePoint there.
A day-long session?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I've done enough of those now that I don't even really think about it. It's not, I don't know. Like, I've just gotten used to it. I was talking to somebody about flying, and my family's taking a vacation this summer, and it's going to be an 8-hour flight. And I fly so much that an 8-hour flight I've got the rhythm down. I know that, 2 hours in, they're going to serve you a meal. And I don't even think about it. And 8-hour classes are exactly the same way. I know where the jokes go. I know where the breaks go. I kind of have the pacing down, and yeah, it's not as intimidating as it was the first time I ever did it.
That's impressive.
And so Shane and I are very much different about that. I'm very, I don't want to say disciplined because that makes me sound like I'm very efficient, but I'm not. But I definitely like having the plan figured out. Whereas Shane is, he's like, it's all going to work. Like we'll get the framework down there, and we will go, and they will love it, and they will learn a lot, and we don't have to put all this. And the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But I don't know how many times in my speaking career I have grabbed a topic or started a talk and said, there is no way that I can talk about this for 75 minutes. There's just not 75 minutes worth of material here. And that's never been the case. I have never ran out of material. It's, and it shows when you're passionate about something, and people start asking questions and you start telling stories and commiserating, it's easy to go. So yeah, 8-hour session. Now I'll be exhausted. I'll need a nap when I get done, but it'll be a good time. So I did that. I did SharePoint Saturday in Atlanta. Trying to think of the other ones that I've done. There was a conference in Sweden here a month or so ago. It used to be called the SharePoint Exchange Forum, but now it's the same initials, SEF. I've done that one probably 8 or 9 times in Stockholm. I do a conference in Slovenia every year, which is an amazing place to go.
Oh, wow.
So doing that one. Yeah, I've got a bunch lined up. Wasn't able to do all the ones that I wanted to this year just because of kids events and travel burnout and all that. And the other thing is, I don't know who all you've got listening, but I do a lot of remote user group talks.
Oh, okay.
I've done a ton of those. So if anybody listening has a PowerShell user group or a SharePoint user group or anything like that, man, reach out to me. Happy to do those things. Happy to help out. I know, having run a user group in the past, finding speakers is painful work that never goes away. It's just you never have enough speakers. So happy to do those. I do those from time to time. Did one for Merrill in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I know that more and more of the PowerShell user groups have people on remote. That's typical, and they live stream and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the technology's definitely gotten to the point where we can really do that now. So I've done that in Oklahoma City. I drove down to Kansas City. I did one in Green Bay. I've done them all. Yeah, the remote ones are easy. Yep. And I'm doing a one for, oh my goodness, the name's blanked on me, in Mississippi. Oh, I feel horrible. But I'm doing one for them here in a couple of months, I think.
Okay.
On Office 365. So yeah, it's good. And it keeps me fresh every time. We've talked a couple of times about how quickly things are changing. I can't ever do a talk, no matter how many times I've done it, without checking every PowerShell commandlet, every page, every link, because it all changes so quickly. Got to make sure that it's still accurate. So that's one of the things that keeps me on my toes. I remember I was speaking at a conference a couple of years ago, and the conference started on Sunday or Monday, and on Thursday I was going through my slides, and the Office 365 interface changed. all these screenshots that I had, they were all no good. I had to create them all. But yeah.
So are they pretty good about keeping the documentation up to date for those commandlets?
They are amazing at that.
Oh, that makes all the difference.
They're amazing at that for a couple of reasons. They've got a great team. I want to give a shout out to Pam Green. She's Microsoft on the documentation team. She's been there for a long time. Every time I see Pam, I'm always like, I don't understand how you guys do your job. It seems Sisyphusian in nature, that there's just you never are caught up. Tom Resing's another buddy of mine that's on that team. They do a great job with that. So number one, they've got some great people that just are passionate about the product and keep things up to date. Number two, they've moved almost all the documentation over to GitHub. So if I go to a page and I see something's wrong, I can just go change it. And that has been, I've added some examples and changed some, yeah. So they've done a good job. I'm really happy with the documentation they've got out there.
That's great. I know I've had some issues with that with certain Microsoft products over the years, but it does seem to be getting better across the board since they went to everything being on Microsoft Docs, and that interface is more consistent. The search is kind of garbage, but you have Google for that.
Yep. Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually used the search on Docs. I'm one of the few people, I do a lot of my searching on Bing. Mostly it came out of people complaining about how terrible Bing was. And let's be honest, for a while, Bing was pretty bad. These days, I'm pretty agnostic between Bing and Google as to which search engine I use. But anytime I end up at docs.microsoft.com, it's because I came from Bing or Google.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. I honestly have not thought about what the search is like on there.
But yeah, like for example, if I'm looking at the SCCM commandlets, which I have to do from time to time, and there's a search like right at the top where all the list of commandlets are, and you put a search term in there, and I'll know the commandlet exists, but you can't find it there.
That's infuriating. I've never thought about that, so I'm going to go to one of them that I was at today. Yeah, there it is. And that's funny because here, smell this. Yeah. And that's funny because search is one of those products coming from SharePoint that has always been one I think Microsoft has not gotten enough respect for. And I think it's mostly because I've seen it from the intranet side, and Bing and Live got a bad name from the internet side. Google owns internet search. There's no argument about that. But Microsoft seemed to understand documents better and how people work better. So I'm a little surprised that that there's not a better experience doing search inside of there. But I'm gonna try it now. Yeah,
and it may be just the SCCM commandlets, because that's usually where I'm lurking for, some parameter or something that I can't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. So I spend a lot of time there, and I guess, I'm not sure exactly who your audience is in the podcast, if it's PowerShell folks or if any of my SharePoint peeps snuck in. But the documents are out there and good. And as I tell any group that I get in front of that does SharePoint, you have to become at least literate in PowerShell, because like I'm currently working on a module for a customer now, and it's a few hundred lines long. I'm not expecting everybody to do that. I can barely do it, and I've been doing PowerShell for 10 years. But you definitely have to understand PowerShell when you see it on someone else's page, someone's blog post. And that's what I tell people. And everybody asks, how do I learn PowerShell? And the way that I got into PowerShell, we were at Microsoft, and it was before SharePoint 2010 came out, and the team was showing us some of the beta, and they're like, this, and this. Oh, and by the way, the command line admin interface is going to be all PowerShell. Hooray! And I'd never used PowerShell at all, and I knew that it was very complicated and that I'm not very smart. And I kind of went through all the stages of grief. There was anger and the bargaining, and I finally made it to I got to acceptance. And so Shane and I decided we needed to figure out PowerShell, because that's that was our job. So I went out and brought Bruce Payette's PowerShell in Action book. It's got the picture of the whirling dervish on the cover. Oh yeah. And cracked it open and started reading, and I think the drool stain starts on page 6, because I just couldn't do it. And so the way that I learned was just finding things that I knew how to do in SharePoint, in Central Admin, creating a site collection, whatever, things that would take me 6 clicks in about 4 seconds, and figuring out how to do it in PowerShell. So I wasn't fighting the end result. I was just fighting the language. I was just fighting the syntax.
Right.
And it was horrible. It was painful, and I cursed PowerShell for months. But then, it started sucking a little less. And so that's what I tell people to do is, as I tell them, get good at PowerShell. If you know what's good for you, get good at PowerShell. And so then the next question is how? What do I do? And so I just tell them, find a task that you do all the time, that that task inside and out, figure out how to do it in PowerShell. And it's going to suck. And it's going to seem so inefficient, and it's going to be backwards and upside down. Figure out how to do it in PowerShell. Email me and I'll help you. And then the next thing you do will be just a little bit easier. And so I mentioned earlier the site designs and the site scripts. That is ugly. That is this weird, ugly marriage between admin tasks and developer tasks, and maybe even some designer tasks. And I mean, it's all JSON. I don't know what the hell a JSON is, but I know it's all over site scripts. So you don't need to understand it all, but just need to understand PowerShell well enough that you can go to that beautiful docs page that walks you through that and understand what those pieces do. And one of the problems, I was walking a customer through that, and the docs pages have the copy, to copy the code out, and couldn't get the JSON to copy, wouldn't work. And kept getting this crazy PowerShell error. But I recognized the error, and I saw what was going on. And somehow when I was doing the copy, it was putting an extra space at the end that was throwing off how the JSON was formatted. So I pasted it in, and I hit the backspace button, and it all worked. And my customer, while they know a little bit of PowerShell, they haven't PowerShelled enough and skinned their knees as many times as I have. They wouldn't have known how to do that. So that's the kind of thing you just need to get used to it and figure it out. Because then when site scripts and site designs show up, you'll be able to get them going. So that would probably be that. And if you're not using the patterns and practices PowerShell, grab that. Hundreds of great. And for you, and I don't know if you're still online, but they've got a module for SharePoint Online, and then they've got a module for SharePoint's 2016 and 2013 also. So it works on-prem as well. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I've got another customer who still has SharePoint on-prem, and I'm writing some PowerShell for them, and I'm just like, I'm just doing it in patterns and practices. I don't even think about it, and it's working out great. Yeah. So does the documentation for these commandlets, are there good examples in there? Mostly. Okay. So it depends on which commandlets you're talking about. I like to tell people that part of the reason that PowerShell is so great is because of Jeff Snover. And because if a module comes from Microsoft, there are certain rules that they're supposed to abide by, and most do. It's got to be verb - noun. There should be a prefix on the noun. Every commandlet should have help. But I like to tell folks that one of the things that they missed was the help has to be accurate. that apparently was not in the design spec. Yes, there is an example there. The example does not work. So it depends a lot on which module you're talking about as to how helpful that is. The PnP, that's all open source. And so if you don't like an example that's there, you can put your own in. And if you don't like an example that's there, you can go into GitHub and you can open up an issue. And so there are definitely a lot of times where the example that I'm looking for is not there, but there's enough to get me going, to get me to figure out what I'm looking for. And a lot of the people that are in at least for the patterns and practices stuff, they're on Twitter or wherever. So I've shot emails or tweets out to them and said, hey, I'm not asking for the answer, just nudge me along. And they're usually pretty helpful. So that's great. But that's one of them. If somebody's using patterns and practices and they can't figure out a commandlet, shoot a tweet out or shoot me a tweet or something. And if I can, add an example that helps you, happy to do that as well.
Fantastic. So is that the best place for people to find you online?
Yeah. So Twitter at Todd Klindt. You can email me, todd@toddklindt.com. I think those are probably the two main places on the internet that I hang out. Pretty active both of those places.
Hopefully you'll be in the PowerShell Slack.
Yeah, and I've been pulled into the PowerShell, and I went into the one channel to do the streaming. Like, oh, you should jump into this other one. Oh, you do SharePoint, you should jump into this other one. Oh, you do speaking. So now I'm a member of 8 channels here in the. I've only been in there for 42 minutes, and I'm already in 8 channels, and so I'll be in there as well. Yeah, and that's one of the things I tell people when I'm doing my vanity slide is, I've been an MVP for however many years. Doesn't mean that I'm the smartest person in the room. Almost never the case. But that MVP label is a good label. If you see it in somebody's Twitter profile or on their blog, those are the kind of people that like to help. Those are the kind of people that you want to leave a comment on their blog and ask the dumb questions, and they're happy to help. And I definitely fall into that group. So you can do that.
Yeah, and even if they don't know the answer, they probably know a person who knows the answer or knows the person who wrote that module or, Yeah.
But those are the people to pester. And I'm in that group and I'm happy to be pestered. But yeah, so PowerShell, SharePoint, however, I'm any of them.
So is there anything else you wanted to cover while you were on?
No, I think I gratuitously plugged my blog several times at toddklindt.com. So that's a big one. And I think if you go to toddklindt.com/posh or /PowerShell, it will take you to all of the PowerShell articles that I've published over the years. Oh, there's some ugly ones in there too.
And then tell me the name of your podcast again so people can find it.
If you're on any of the podcast aggregators, I think it shows up as Todd and Shane's Cloudy Podcast. There is a link. If you go to my blog, I blog every episode that comes out, and there's links on there to subscribe in iTunes or any of those other places. It shows up in the Google Play Store. I think we're on Stitcher. I forget. I'm terrible at that part of it. And I guess if somebody wants to listen to it and it's not on whatever their platform is, give me a shout out and I'll see what it takes to get on there. So that's one of the things. You and I have been podcasting long enough that we did it and we got it working, 8-10 years ago.
Yes.
And the landscape has changed so tremendously that it's a lot easier to get listed places, and I've just never even thought about it. So that's So I'm happy to get listed wherever.
I have an issue now where for some reason my album art doesn't always show up, and I'm like, where's that actually stored again? What does it point to that in the RSS feed? How do I do that?
Yeah,
that's not part of iTunes, is it? Do I need to log into the podcast thing in iTunes? And
I don't even know if I know that username anymore. I don't make my RSS feed XML by hand. I do it with PowerShell mostly. But yeah, there is a field at the top up there that has your album art. But that's the other thing is so I think Google is one of them. They require your album art to be a certain resolution or higher.
Oh yeah, so, I know iTunes does. It's has to be 1400 by 1400.
Yep. So your album art that worked for 100 years, they changed that spec, and all of a sudden your album art goes away, and you didn't change anything. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
So that's a piece that I don't stay up with as much as I should. So you guys have a great chat room. That's something our podcast, we also have a Slack chat room. And in this, man, that makes all the difference. So thanks to all the folks that are in there. And I hope I gave shout outs to all the people that were active in there. But that makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for coming on and spending some time with us. And
my pleasure.
Sharing. We haven't talked about SharePoint on this podcast in a long time.
Well, let's fix that. Yeah. And I was, for those of you listening, I was talking to Jonathan earlier, and the last podcast had Don on it. And I'm like, man, the contrast in quality between Don and myself. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about. And it's not just SharePoint anymore. It's Office 365. And like I said, you can't be an effective SharePoint or Office 365 admin without being able to crank open a PowerShell prompt and do some work in there. So if you ever need anybody else or you need me on again, just throw up I would say the bat signal, but so one of my cars is a 1977 Trans Am, like in Smokey the Bandit.
Wow.
So, yep. So just throw up the Trans Am signal and I'll jump on.
That's nice.
Yep.
You said something earlier that made me think of Don Jones, because I found out when he was on that he was an aircraft mechanic. And he used to work on F-14s.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, I worked on Hueys and Blackhawks.
Okay.
So UH-1s and UH-60s when I was in the Army. And I don't know if you have Netflix, but there's a new movie on Netflix that's a couple months old now called Triple Frontier. Got Ben Affleck, and it's pretty good. It's a heist movie, pretty good.
Okay.
But like the second scene, like 3 minutes into this movie, they switch to a scene where there's a raid going on, and there's people in a helicopter. It's a Black Hawk, and I'm like, yeah. And they start playing "For Whom the Bell Tolls" by Metallica in the background. I'm like, nice. This is my favorite movie ever. It's got helicopters. It's got Metallica. Like I'm just gonna watch this loop over and over. But yeah, that was working on helicopters and all that. And the military is just great for exposing kids to that. I didn't realize that Don was in the Air Force or the Navy. I don't know who has F-14s. Probably the Navy.
The Navy. He worked for the Navy. He wasn't in the Navy. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's fun. And I don't imagine he had this experience, but as somebody who worked on helicopters, I got to go up in them all the time because pilots have to get so many hours and all that. And that was something I did all the time when I was in my 20s. And just, again, you do it 3 or 4 times, you don't think about it. And then as an adult, like nobody goes up in helicopters. That's just not a thing. It's, and so my wife and I went out to New York City. Her company IPO'd here 5 years ago, and they got to go on the New York Stock Exchange floor and ring the bell and all that.
Oh, nice.
And she'd never been to New York City. So I'm like, well, we should, it was in January. We couldn't walk everywhere because we'd have frozen our fingers off. So we took a helicopter tour and took some of our coworkers with us. And they were as excited about being in a helicopter as they were about being in New York City for the first time. I'm like,
sure.
I would be too. Right? No, everybody hasn't ridden in helicopters 100 times. So that's military's great for that stuff.
Yeah, but if you get a chance to listen to the show that Don was on, I just posted it today, actually. I was late getting that done. But he talks about that, and I think he did say that he has flown in F-14s before, and I think he said he may have been in an A-10 Warthog.
Really?
I don't remember. But wow. So he did get a chance to do some of that stuff.
Every time I'm in Vegas, I mean to hook up with Don and just get busy and never do it. And the other thing is, Don's lived in Vegas forever, so he doesn't go to the Strip. People who live in Vegas stay away from that area.
Actually, I think he lives a lot closer to the Strip now than he used to. He moved recently. Yeah. Yep. So I think he's closer to the action down there.
I might do that. I haven't talked to Don in person in several years, so.
Yeah, do it soon because he's not as involved with the PowerShell stuff anymore. He's kind of stepping away from that.
Oh, that's too bad.
From speaking and doing the PowerShell.org and things like that. So, but he is still writing and doing all the stuff he does for Pluralsight. So it's good.
Yep, I've learned a lot from Don. I've learned a lot of PowerShell and his other things, his other blog posts about working and professional topics as well. That friendship has been a very valuable one. It's been good.
So when's the last time you wrote a book? Do you have a recent one?
No. The last one we wrote was SharePoint 2013.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if you've written any books. I can't remember.
I haven't. No. Hal's written one. I'm not sure if Ryan has written one.
It's a painful experience. Pays probably about as well as McDonald's. Maybe a little less when you consider how many hours you put into it. It goes up on the shelf is probably 6 months. And so now imagine writing a book that the newest content is 6 months old. The oldest content might be a year old. It might have taken you 6 months to write that book.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, no one's going to buy that book, at least not in the technologies that I work in. And so our SharePoint 2010 and 2013 books were big sellers. And then when SharePoint 2016 came out, Wiley approached us about it. And by that time, Shane and I and our third author, Steve, had, we had kids and soccer and all that. Shane had discovered golf and wine. And so we didn't do another book because it just takes so much time and we just didn't think the payoff was going to be there. So haven't written one in 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now everything is, and you're podcasting, so you're still getting the information out there. You've got your blog, so that's a lot of that stuff's a lot more timely.
It is. Well, that presents its own problems, is keeping that current. So I mentioned my blog post that has the different modules that I use with PowerShell with Office 365, and I put a reminder in my calendar every month. I forget what day it is to go check that blog post because that gets stale so quickly. And I should do that on some of my older blog posts as well, because it's out there. People find it. I watch my Google Analytics. I see the articles of people hitting. I'm like, man, I wrote that thing 12 years ago. That has no value today. Don't read that article. So it's a different kind of pressure to keep that up to date.
That makes sense. Well, great. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been great talking to you again.
Yep. Sorry I missed Hal. Haven't seen him in a long time either.
Yeah, he was actually on a plane when he probably still is.
Excuses.
I know. He's had some issues with his calendar and not getting the invites, but we're going to try and fix that.
Yeah. Well, anytime if you guys want SharePoint or Office 365 content, I'm here for you.
Perfect.
And thanks everybody that's listening.
Okay, I stopped recording. I'm still streaming though. Did you still want to talk about podcast stuff, or did we cover everything you wanted to talk about?
I think mostly. I might shoot you some questions, and a lot of it has to do with getting into the right aggregators and all that, because I think I've fallen behind on that.
Oh, I might not be able to help you. I set that stuff up, like you said, 10 years ago, and
yeah. Yep. Yeah. For hardware, I think we're muddling through. What we can't do is bring a third person in, and it's for all the reasons that you're using Reaper.
Okay.
It's all, who hears who and whose audio goes where. That we can't crack that with a third person.
Right.
So we just don't have three people. That's been the way we've fixed that. We just don't ever invite a third person in.
Yeah. If you ever decide you want to go down that road, let me know. And
and I looked at the Reaper pricing. It's not that bad.
No, it's ridiculous.
I don't bring in $20,000 of revenue with my podcast, so
yeah,
plenty of room there. But and I might spam you for a while with music things that.
Oh, that would be good. I need to add to my playlist.
I remember you used the Spotify playlist or something the last time, or no, it was Shark FM or something.
Gosh, what was it? Yeah,
it was something last time. Yeah, and I remember thinking there's a lot of overlap in our tastes.
Yeah, I forget. I think that platform died. I think they got DMCA'd out of existence or something.
Well, and that's a funny thing. So even with the podcasting, I used to broadcast on Stickcam, and they went away. And I used to broadcast on Ustream, and they went away. Mm-hmm. And YouTube has been pretty good, but then I don't have enough viewing hours, so I can't monetize anymore. So that kind of stunk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never tried to do any monetization.
Yeah, I had a little bit for a while.
YouTube.
Yeah, it wasn't my focus. I didn't care much, but that was
Yeah, Twitch is what the cool kids are doing now. Have you seen any of that?
Very little, but I do know that that's probably where I need to go.
Yeah, so there are people who are live coding PowerShell on Twitch, and that's a thing.
I have considered doing that, and I'm not confident enough of my PowerShell to do that. So maybe, and that might be just one of those things I just did not care about.
Right.
But yeah, I just like I don't want to look bad. I don't want to teach people bad things. I don't want them to see the mistakes.
One of the things is that, you know, people may look at you as an MVP and think, oh, he must, you know, just be able to write PowerShell functions, just hammer them out, right? They don't realize that, you know, you're human, and it's not going to work the first time you type it in, or the second time, or the third time, and you're going to have to look that parameter up, and you know that's. But when they see that, they learn from the mistakes, and they're like, oh, he's just like me. I don't need to be afraid of PowerShell.
Yeah, that's what Joel's saying in the chat room too, and that's probably right. I'm just always worried it's going to be bad. Going to be a bad example for somebody. That's. But thanks, Joel. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I have got to go.
It is late your time. It is even later than it is my time.
It is.
So once you get this published, let me know, and I will blog and tweet and smoke signal and all that.
Okay. Perfect.
So right. Thank you, sir. Have a good night.
Take care. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.